We had a public address system, and I sabotaged it so it wouldn't work, thinking I'd get out of doing it. But I was reminded by one of the cards that come, and I think people do expect to maybe hear a little bit about how Patricia and I and our family came to be what we left with today. And a couple of years ago, we were invited to a wedding of one of my nephews, eldest of my eldest sister, and I was asked, as well as a number of other couples were on that particular occasion, as we'd reached, 60 plus years of marriage together, and they asked us to talk about our secret for longevity of marriage. Now, apparently because we were the oldest of the group in a number of years of married life, most of the others had seemed to have gone through a couple of partners or much shorter periods, and I realised we were last. So we fronted up, and at those stages Pat was already in her decline, and we sort of hobbled out together and hung on to each other. And I concluded at the time that the secret we had is the first thing: if you want a long marriage, you start off by marrying young. The second requirement is don't die, because that blows the whole thing out of the water. And the final, deep and meaningful one, you become excessively intolerant about each of your own stupid, ridiculous opinions and put up with them. For that, it worked. I'm going to keep it in context. I did write some notes, and I'm pretty dreadful at this sort of stuff. Actually, Patricia and I met on a blind date in about February 1961, and the couple that triggered that off were one of my associates at the Electricity Trust of South Australia, where at the time we were cadets, and my wife was working with a lass Shirley in a druggery store on Port Road, and Max, my friend from work, had I think it was 21st birthday party or engagement, I forget, but big thing at his place, and they contrived to put us together. And Sandra was there too. Where are you, Sandy? Are you still here? Oh, there she is. That's Patricia's young sister at the back there. And they both came, and it was a wonderful night, and I think I spent more time dancing with you, Sandra. And I think even Patricia was somewhat flattened by that process. It was just that, I guess it's fair to say Sandra was always a little more outgoing than Patricia ever was or would be. However, on the next day I did in fact visit the family and reacquainted again with Patricia, and it all went downhill from there. This was February 1961, so in those days you got engaged, and then you sort of spent minimum of 12 months engaged, and you'd plan and the weddings and all the parties and go on for ages. We didn't really make a lot of it, but the couple that put us together, the lass actually was on a working holiday from Perth with her family, and she had lived, and I ended up being the best man at their wedding, so Patricia and I joined the family saga over to Perth for the wedding, and wonderful time. Went over on the train, it was all very great, and they got married, and we came back, and on the way home, for some stupid reason, I contracted laryngitis, and I think if I remember correctly, Pat said we ought to get married, and I couldn't defend that. So December the 23rd of that same year, we were married. The family all got, yeah, come on, you guys get married, you've been around long enough, okay. And you can imagine that the people were counting up on their fingers after they were married. Or what did they get up to on the way back to Perth? Nothing happened and they were terribly disappointed. But we did go on, and at that stage I had completed a trade with the Electricity Trust of South Australia. They presented me with some ongoing opportunities which enabled me to complete an electrical engineering degree. Now, I had by that time done about 1 year's equivalent of the first year of a degree course part-time. And for some reason ETSA decided there was maybe something in me that I never knew, and they offered me a 2-year scholarship to finish the degree on full trade pay, all expenses paid, and I was sensible enough to take that up. And through that period of study, Pat was a massive support to me. I'd get home from day school and she'd just keep feeding me cups of tea and coffee, and I'd be out the back studying my heart out. And all of which paid off and provided us with a good background for a career. That ultimately took there was one disadvantage in that particular scholarship, which was absolutely wonderful. Normally, if you've done a part-time degree there, when you finally graduated, they say, well, you've been here for about 7 or 8 years, we'll credit you with, say, 3 or 4 years of assessed experience, and they put you up, quite a bit up the pay scale. The one thing they didn't do with this full-time scholarship, when you got through the degree, you were at the bottom level. That annoyed me a wee bit, but it was still very good. However, one morning I was sitting home, decided to read the newspaper and the want ads for jobs, which I've never bothered to do. And there was a job advertised in Townsville in Queensland for the Townsville Regional Electricity Board for Assistant Substation Engineer. Now, Townsville Regional Board and ETSA massive at that stage, Regional Board quite small. The Assistant Substation Engineer in ETSA had, I think, about 1,000 employees in the group. Townsville Regional Electricity Board, I was the third of the substation department. However, we did have 2 lovely years there. We finally figured out where the babies came from, and our eldest daughter Linda was born there. A year later I was headhunted by a consulting firm in Adelaide, Mark Tosterman and Associates, and we both returned to South Australia, and I took up that. And as Fraser Gascoigne here might remember, working for Mark Tosterman was a massive challenge, but it was an enormous learning curve, and it took us through a whole range of careers that ultimately had us moving to Sydney, to India, worked in most states in South Australia. Pat tagged along, the kids put up with us. We finally licked them. They tended to follow. Our eldest and our youngest, Linda and Chad, both live now in New South Wales area and have done for many years. They threatened to follow us to India, but didn't make it. The experience in India, Pat was able to travel with us. It was professionally excellent, socially living with the Indian people and getting was a wonderful experience. And because it was classed as a hardship post, it was also financially extremely profitable. And there's a whole long story with that, but we came back ultimately, and there were various opportunities that came up to work on Children's Hospital and all sorts of things that didn't eventuate, but ultimately we got transferred back to Sydney in the end, and my boss Fraser, where is he? Is he gone?
No.
Rosie, you still with us? Ah,
Yeah, I haven't gone to sleep yet.
I've got to be careful what I say.
I've got the
Yeah, I
car
was
keys, so we can't
seconded for a
lose.
couple of years over in Sydney, but that ended up about 10 years in the end. So a long experience. Subsequently, pretty much after the Indian thing and the Sydney thing, I was getting a bit old, losing it, and couldn't remember all the stuff. And Fraser was sick of trying to pull me out of trouble, and we went into sort of semi-retirement. But we did quite a bit together after those times, and I had been very fortunate to, in ETSA and particularly the Townsville Regional Electricity Board, to be involved in a lot of high voltage systems, power supply distribution, that sort of thing. And that complemented a lot of the sort of work that Fraser had been doing, and we helped there occasionally when he got into the high voltage job. Some of those were quite challenging, still are. So I was in fact born here at Galway, although I was about 5 when left, but my mother was part of the Ritchie clan, and Sir George Ritchie was her uncle, and my father was part of the David Milner's son boat builders on the river, and there are a number of paddle boats, barges. In fact, the Dart barge that's down there was one of the boats they built, and there were many of the paddle steamers they built. Unfortunately for Dad, the river trade was declining, and the Depression came on, and he lost his. He was building pleasure boats after his father had died, and of course nobody wanted pleasure boats at that stage, so that finished that part of it. But while we were still in India finishing, we had a number of our close friends and relatives who'd moved back to Galway, and in retirement and semi-retirement, also one of my sisters and her husband. Some people here will know Miriam and Don Ware, and so we chose to buy a house back in Galway. So it was some 50 years later from when I left at about 5, and came back to Galway. But I still class myself as I'm a local here. I went into retirement. We spent years in Rotary. For about 40, I am still an honorary member of this particular club here, the Rotary Club of Galway, although a very inactive one, I don't know. But through all of that, Patricia's life has always been supportive of me. Her whole life was told at helping me and her family and taking care of us. And we miss her greatly. But I'm so proud to have had the opportunity to have been supported. Thank you.